The ballroom sparkled with 1,000 glimmers, each chandelier flame refracting upon polished parquet floors like captive stars. The scent of roses and tallow mingled with the faint trace of pipe smoke from the men who lingered near the corners, discussing politics and dueling stories in murmured tones. Lady Eloan's heart thudded beneath the delicate lace of her gown, a rhythm nearly drowned by the collective hum of laughter and polite gossip that swirled like the wind through the gilded windows. She felt herself a shadow amid the brilliance, a note held in suspense before the orchestra's first dramatic chord, fragile and unobserved. Her gown was modest, pale sapphire trimmed with silver filigree, a quiet defiance to the louder silks and velvets paraded by other débutantes. It was a choice dictated by her mother's thrift, by her own instinct for restraint, yet every eye seemed to mistake humility for insignificance. The Earl's daughter, scarcely noticeable, she overheard, a whisper meant to brush her name into the dirt. She kept her gaze low, fingertips resting upon the folds of fabric as if the gown itself could anchor her against the scrutiny that threatened to unravel her composure. A servant approached, balancing a tray of flutes, and she accepted one with a trembling hand. The bubbles in the sparkling wine rose like stolen secrets, and she imagined her own name rising in whispers through the ballroom, frail and trembling, fragile as the crystal she now held. The music shifted, a waltz begun, and her steps followed, tentative, each movement a careful negotiation between propriety and panic. From across the room he appeared. The War Duke, Lord Thornawood, a man whose reputation was as formidable as the campaigns he commanded and as perilous as the reputation he bore. His eyes, dark as storm clouds yet edged with the faintest glimmer of firelight, rested upon her with the unsettling weight of a predator assessing prey, not in cruelty, but in an intent that made the air itself tremble. He was a figure of whispered awe, his uniform impeccable, brass buttons gleaming like captured suns, the ribbon of a medal across his chest catching the light in a flash that sent a shiver through her. Eloan's cheeks warmed, not with pride, but with a strange terror. She had heard of his exploits, of the women who had caught his glance and found themselves forever changed, ensnared by a man whose temper could command armies yet whose heart remained a mystery. And yet, as she met his gaze, there was something else, a flicker, almost imperceptible, of curiosity, a storm held in check, and in that moment she felt herself seen truly, though every courtly expectation insisted she shrink and fade. A sudden misstep, a heel caught in the hem of another lady's gown, sent her spinning slightly, and the room's polite chatter splintered into gasps. A delicate vase trembled upon a nearby table, and a ripple of whispered laughter cascaded like a cruel brook. "Clumsy child," a voice murmured behind her, silk rustling, perfume overpowering. She bowed her head, the heat of embarrassment flushing her neck and ears, wishing the floor would open beneath her shoes and swallow her whole. Yet the Duke remained, unwavering, his expression unreadable but his eyes never leaving her. A single, almost imperceptible lift of his brow, and she felt it, a tether, invisible yet unyielding, pulling her awareness toward him, daring her to rise above the humiliation, to meet the world with something akin to courage. She straightened, if only fractionally, and the faintest quiver of acknowledgment passed between them. Her mother's voice intruded, a soft insistence at the back of her mind. "Remember your station, remember your promise." Lady Eloan's betrothal had been arranged years prior, a transaction of honor and familial duty, and yet the weight of that promise felt suddenly brittle in the presence of a man who could ignite the air with a glance. The juxtaposition was unbearable. Safety and scandal, duty and desire, all colliding in the space between heartbeats. The orchestra's swell carried her across the ballroom once more, steps faltering yet graceful, a trembling rhythm in contrast to the steady confidence of those around her. Every movement was observed, judged, catalogued. And she felt, in a subtle way, that the Duke watched not merely her form, but the undercurrent of thought and fear, the invisible architecture of her shame, and that knowledge both terrified and enticed her. A rival, Lady Pembroke, approached under the pretense of social pleasantries. Her smile was thin, too polished to be genuine, her gloved hand brushing Eloan's in a manner calculated to startle and unsettle. "I hear your mother still insists upon propriety," she said, voice like silk over steel. Yet propriety seemed scarcely sufficient for one so slight. Laughter, quiet but sharp, tickled the edges of the room, and Eloan bowed her head, cheeks aflame, feeling herself the subject of invisible claws. The Duke moved then as though drawn by a magnetic pulse, and the air seemed to condense around him. He stepped close, the faint scent of leather and rain-damp wool marking his presence. "Lady Eloan," he said, low and deliberate, and the world seemed to tilt. I find that even the most delicate presence may conceal a storm. His words, formal yet electric, brushed against her with the weight of possibility, and she dared a glance. Their eyes met, and in that instant the ballroom, the gossip, the scandal, all the rigid rules and whispered expectations, receded into shadow. Yet duty lingered. The promise to another loomed like a chain she could not yet break, a chain she felt tightening with each heartbeat. Shame and longing intertwined, a knot she could neither unravel nor ignore. She dared not speak, and the Duke did not press. Still, the tension, palpable and unyielding, wrapped around them like the very air of the gilded chamber. The music slowed, a momentary lull, and she found herself alone with the enormity of the gaze she could not forget. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment of the assembly, all fell away beneath the intensity of one look, one acknowledgement, one silent promise that trembled like a candle flame between them. In that fragile space, shame became a mirror, reflecting not only her own fragility but the possibility of desire unbound, dangerous, and breathtakingly real. A hush swept the ballroom as the orchestra prepared for the next dance. Eloan's pulse raced, cheeks still aflame, mind a storm of propriety and forbidden curiosity. The Duke's eyes lingered, an unspoken question hanging between them like smoke. Could a single glance, a single spark, alter the trajectory of a life so carefully dictated by rank, duty, and expectation? And then, as if drawn by fate itself, the Duke extended a gloved hand, deliberate, commanding, and yet infused with the faintest hint of invitation. The room seemed to hold its breath, the whispers paused, and Eloan's heart quivered with a mixture of dread and longing she had never before dared to name. She looked at the hand, then at the man whose reputation could crush nations and hearts alike, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the distance between them. The air was electric, the moment fragile, and somewhere deep within her, a dangerous thrill took root, a thrill that promised everything she had been taught to fear. The days that followed the ball were a delicate torment. Lady Eloan moved through the corridors of her family estate as though caught between waking and dream, each step weighted by the memory of the Duke's gaze, the electric lift of his brow, the faintest curl of a smile that had both unsettled and ignited her. Servants whispered, not always discreetly, and the household seemed smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves had learned to carry rumors. The locket he had left upon her dressing table, a slender oval of gold containing a pressed violet, rested against her heart like a pulse of audacity. She dared not touch it openly, yet the warmth of its presence behind silken folds felt like a secret rebellion. Outside, the gardens were drenched in early spring rain, petals heavy with moisture and the scent of wet earth, each droplet a prism reflecting the gray, restless sky. Eloan wandered among the pathways, her gloves damp at the fingertips, her thoughts a tumult of propriety and forbidden desire. She imagined the Duke moving through this same rain, deliberate, commanding, his boots striking the stones with a rhythm that echoed the relentless beating of her own heart. He was a storm she could not predict, yet one whose arrival she longed for, dangerous and exhilarating in equal measure. News arrived, subtle and insidious, carried in the polished tones of visiting matrons and cousins with sharper tongues than affection. "A gentleman of the highest rank has taken notice of our Eloan," whispered Lady Pembroke during tea, her eyes glinting like shattered glass. "And though the War Duke's attention is flattering, one wonders if it is altogether wise." The words were meant to wound, and they did. Eloan's stomach clenched, a mixture of dread and the smallest, most defiant thrill. Flattery from him was a perilous thing, yet to her it felt less like vanity than revelation, a glimpse into a life unshackled from expectation. At night, letters arrived, penned in a hand both deliberate and familiar, their ink smudged slightly as if rushed between campaigns. He wrote not of conquest nor of etiquette but of observation, details of flowers in bloom, the quiet patterns of her mornings, the softening of light on the drawing-room carpet. Each word was a token of attention, of intimacy crafted in restraint. Each sentence left her trembling, the corners of her mouth turning upward despite herself, her pulse quickened by the audacity of private acknowledgement in a world so fixated on public propriety. Yet scandal had begun to bloom alongside desire. Servants, ever observant, carried tidings to every corner of the estate, glances shared between master and daughter, an unclaimed flower delivered in silence, a visitor whose presence lingered too long in corridors meant for domestic business. The household murmured, subtle at first, then louder with each passing day, and even the walls of her room seemed complicit in the gossip. Her mother, graceful yet brittle with concern, approached one evening, hands folded as if to brace herself against the storm she suspected was coming. "Eloan, she said softly, her voice carrying that careful mixture of worry and reprimand that always made the young lady's chest constrict. "You must remember your duty, your engagement. Curiosity and admiration are not luxuries we may afford to indulge." Duty. The word struck like a cold bell in her mind. She touched the locket again, its pressed violet a whisper of defiance, and yet the weight of promise anchored her. Her suitor, the man to whom she was betrothed, was a quiet gentleman of impeccable manners and a steady fortune, predictable in ways that were both reassuring and suffocating. In his presence, her cheeks would color, not with desire but with obligation. The contrast was unbearable, the secure, safe path of duty versus the perilous, intoxicating path marked by a glance and a single daring gift. One afternoon he appeared in the gardens. The Duke's entrance was sudden, as though conjured by the shifting light itself, his cloak damp at the hem from the drizzle, boots glinting in the muted sun. He carried no formalities, no announcement, simply presence. "Lady Earl'S," he said, voice low, steady, a note of amusement threading through its baritone. "Do you often walk beneath the rain to contemplate reprimand, or merely to tempt fate?" Her hands, still gloved, twitched at her sides. She wanted to flee, to retreat to the sanctuary of her drawing room, yet the pull of his eyes anchored her. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him despite the chill of the drizzle. "I trust you are not afraid of a little scandal?" His lips curved faintly, a shadow of a smile meant only for her, and in it lay both challenge and invitation. The blood in her veins responded before reason could intervene. I am mindful," she said, voice brittle but resisting collapse. "And scandal is most unbecoming." "Unbecoming?" he echoed, and the word held no mockery, only the weight of deliberate curiosity. "I find it remarkable, then, that so few things about you appear unbecoming. Even in moments of unintended folly, there is a gravity I cannot ignore." His gaze lingered, not as a predator, but as a man measuring the storm within her, sensing the conflagration beneath the carefully tended composure. The afternoon stretched as they walked along the rain-slick paths, speaking in riddles and parables, each sentence a coin flipped between civility and revelation. He spoke of campaigns, yes, but always returned to observation, of how light touched her hair, the sound of her gloves brushing petals, the quiet dignity in the curve of her wrist as she carried her parasol. Earl'S, in turn, found herself responding, cautiously, in the language of hints and understatement, each phrase a measured rebellion, each glance a permission she did not yet dare to name. Even as her pulse raced, the shadow of obligation loomed. She remembered her betrothal, the promises made in ink and solemn ceremony, and a pang of fear cut through the thrill. Yet the gift of attention, the flower, the letters, the stolen moments in rain-soaked gardens, created a fracture in her carefully constructed world, and in that fracture possibility stirred. Her heart, once restrained by protocol and prudence, began to pulse with the faintest rhythm of rebellion. As the afternoon waned and the first flickers of twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and golds, the Duke stopped beside a fountain, the water catching light and shadows in equal measure. He regarded her with a gaze that balanced audacity and respect, desire and consideration. "Lady Earl'S," he said, voice dropping to a hush that seemed to command the very air, "the world may judge and the world may scorn, but it is not the world that defines your worth." His words trembled between lecture and confession, and in them she recognized the truth she had long avoided. He saw her, not the daughter, not the ornament of duty, but the living, breathing woman within. A sudden noise, a servant returning, a window rattling against the wind, tore the fragile intimacy away. Earl'S breath caught, and the Duke stepped back, a mask of composure returning to his features, though the intensity lingered in his eyes. He inclined his head, the slightest bow, and left her there amidst the rain-damp petals and fading light. She clutched the locket, trembling, her pulse a drumbeat of anticipation, desire, and fear. And as she watched him vanish along the garden path, a thought took root in her mind, both thrilling and terrifying. Duty, propriety, and promise may bind her outwardly, yet inwardly, a reckoning had begun, a storm no etiquette could contain. The candlelight trembled in the quiet library, shadows stretching across the spines of leather-bound volumes like dark fingers. Rain lashed the tall windows, drumming a rhythm that mirrored the erratic pulse in Lady Earl'S chest. She sat upon a velvet settee, hands folded in her lap, yet unable to still the tremor that ran through her. Each drop against the glass seemed to echo the warning her mother's voice had instilled in her since childhood. Duty first, desire never. And yet, from somewhere beyond propriety, beyond the careful lines drawn by promise and obligation, a presence entered the room that made such admonitions feel fragile, nearly meaningless. The Duke stood in the doorway, his cloak heavy with rain, droplets glinting like scattered jewels. His eyes, dark and commanding, softened only when they rested upon her. "You keep the night for yourself," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "and yet it is impossible to think you alone can contain it." The words were enigmatic, a puzzle she felt compelled to solve. There was no malice, no expectation of submission, only recognition. Recognition, and that alone was more dangerous than any direct declaration. Eloan rose with a careful grace, her heart hammering beneath the corset of restraint she had so meticulously constructed. I did not hear you enter," she murmured, voice wavering between composure and confession. Every polite syllable was edged with tension, each gesture measured against the propriety she had been drilled to uphold. Yet in the curve of her shoulder, the tilt of her chin, there was an unspoken appeal, a fragile plea for understanding she dared not voice aloud. He approached, boots silent against the rug, the storm outside contrasting with the warmth of his presence. "I have come not to startle you," he said, the timbre of his tone deep, velvety, yet commanding. "I have come because it is impossible to look upon you and remain indifferent." The confession, though subtle, struck like a bell beneath her ribs. Indifference, he denied it entirely. And that denial felt like both sanctuary and peril. Eloan's hands clenched the folds of her gown, her pulse a wild drum in the quiet room. "You speak as though I could abandon all caution, all duty, simply because you choose to notice me," she said, the words flowing more forcefully than intended, an undercurrent of frustration mingling with fascination. "It is not so simple, my lord. I am promised. I am bound." Her eyes sought his, desperate to gauge whether the intensity reflected mere passion or a tempest capable of bearing consequences. "Bound?" The word fell from his lips like a knife, deliberate, questioning, searching. "And yet here you stand, unafraid, beneath the storm of rain and judgment alike. I see, Lady Eloan, a courage that the world may have overlooked, a fire within you that no promise can extinguish." His hand hovered near hers, not touching, and the restraint was more electric than any physical contact could have been. It was a negotiation, a test of patience, and a temptation she could not resist examining. The room contracted around them, volumes of history and law bearing silent witness to an intimacy neither permitted yet both craved. Eloan's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "I fear scandal, I fear consequences. I have lived my life with the shape of expectation pressing upon every breath." A shiver passed over her shoulders, not from the cold but from the revelation that she was unburdening herself to a man whose reputation could shatter the very world she occupied. And yet, in sharing her fear, she felt a strange liberation, a delicate lifting of the veil she had so long worn. The Duke's expression softened, a rare vulnerability glimpsed behind the iron mask of command. "And yet," he said, moving a single step closer, "you speak openly here with me in a manner the world has forbidden you to speak to anyone. That very fear you name, it is the tether that binds us in this moment, and perhaps it is the tether that can also set us free." His words hovered like a promise and a dare entwined, and Eloan felt the weight of choice pressing upon her more insistently than ever. Her breath caught as she considered him fully, not the fearsome reputation, not the medals or the stories whispered across drawing rooms, but the man who saw her as she had never been seen. Her heart, so long disciplined and silent, fluttered against the ribs of propriety. "I do not know if I am brave enough," she admitted, voice barely audible above the rain, "to claim even a single moment that is mine alone, untainted by duty or expectation." Her confession trailed, fragile as the mist that clung to the windows outside. "Bravery is not the absence of fear," he said, stepping nearer still, the scent of damp wool and leather enveloping her, "but the act of pressing forward despite it." His gaze held hers with unwavering gravity, a magnet drawing every doubt, every hesitation toward him, yet without compulsion, without coercion. "I offer no ease, Lady Eloan, only honesty. You may accept it, or decline, but you cannot pretend it does not exist." She drew a shuddering breath, a mixture of relief and terror. For the first time, the weight of expectation felt negotiable, not absolute. For the first time, she recognized the stirrings of a truth she had been too cautious, too constrained to acknowledge. She desired him even as duty demanded another. The paradox was exquisite, unbearable, intoxicating. Her hands trembled where they rested upon the velvet of her skirts, fingers brushing the faintest shimmer of the locket he had left, a tactile connection to a promise unspoken. The storm outside intensified, wind rattling the panes, rain drumming in a chaotic symphony. Eloan felt a tremor ripple through her chest, her thoughts a tangle of propriety, longing and a wild, sudden hope. "And if I were to betray the world," she said, voice fragile, "to embrace even a fragment of what you offer, could I endure the consequences?" He regarded her in silence, the flickering candlelight casting half his face in shadow, half in revelation. "Endure?" he echoed softly. "My lady, to endure would be to settle for a life unchosen. To embrace even a fragment is to live authentically, with all the peril and all the wonder therein. The world may judge, but the heart knows truth." Eloan's gaze dropped to the locket, pressed violet against gold, a symbol of attention and audacity, both gift and challenge. Her pulse throbbed in her throat as realization dawned. The private confession was not mere words, but a key turning the lock on every carefully constructed boundary she had known. Desire and duty clashed violently within her, yet in that clash she glimpsed the possibility of a life governed by neither alone, a life where choice and passion might coexist, however precariously. The Duke extended a hand, gloved yet warm, resting it lightly on the edge of the settee, a deliberate bridge between propriety and promise. "I ask nothing more than honesty," he said. "And yet, even honesty requires courage. Tell me, Lady Eloan, will you permit yourself to be seen as I see you, even if only for a fleeting moment?" Her fingers twitched, hovering near his without contact, and her breath hitched. The rain fell in relentless sheets outside, a testament to the storm that mirrored her own emotions. She lifted her gaze, meeting his with unflinching intensity, a mixture of fear, longing, and burgeoning trust. I do not know if I can yet," she whispered, "but I cannot deny that I wish to try." His smile was the faintest curve, a shadow of victory, and yet gentle enough to leave her unshaken in her autonomy. In that moment, the library ceased to be a room, the rain ceased to batter the panes, and a fragile connection formed, tenuous yet undeniable. Two hearts, each bound by rules and expectation, now acknowledged the gravity of one another's presence, and in doing so, altered the landscape of their lives irreversibly. A sudden knock at the library door shattered the fragile intimacy, a herald of intrusion, obligation, and societal oversight. Eloan's pulse jumped, the moment suspended, and the Duke's gaze hardened imperceptibly, the mask of command snapping back into place. He stepped away, voice low, deliberate. "We are not yet free, Lady Eloan. But know this, when the world forces us apart, it cannot undo what has begun." She pressed the locket to her chest, breath ragged, heart alight with both fear and promise. Outside, the storm raged as if in concurrence with the tumult within her, and the library, now empty of privacy, seemed to hum with anticipation of what was yet to come. The ballroom was alive with anticipation, a symphony of crystal, candlelight, and whispered speculation. Evening had fallen, and the chandeliers blazed like captured daylight, reflecting upon gilded walls and polished floors. Lady Eloan stood near the grand staircase, her gown a river of sapphire silk that caught the candlelight and fractured it into fragments of gold and azure. Each breath was measured, each step deliberate, yet beneath her composure quivered a storm of anticipation. The Duke's presence had been the subject of every whisper that evening, a shadow that followed her like a heartbeat she could neither escape nor ignore. Music swelled, a waltz that drew pairs into a slow, sinuous dance. Eloan's eyes swept the crowd, taking in the eager glances of suitors and cousins alike, noting the subtle judgments and the practiced smiles of matrons who measured virtue by both wealth and restraint. Her betrothed, standing near the orchestra, attempted a courteous bow, a token of propriety, but she saw in his polite attention only the cold arithmetic of obligation. He was reliable, predictable, and painfully blind to the fire that now flickered within her chest, kindled by the Duke's unseen gaze. And then he appeared. The War Duke moved with the quiet inevitability of a storm, boots clicking against the floor, coat brushing the hem of the rugs, eyes fixed on her with unwavering intent. Conversation faltered, a subtle hush rippled through the ballroom, and for a moment, all eyes were drawn to the man whose reputation could command armies and crush hearts alike. Eloan's pulse quickened, a delicate tremor that ran through her fingers and toes. She felt both dread and exhilaration, society's scrutiny and her own longing entwined in a tension so palpable it seemed to vibrate in the very air. The Duke approached, hand gloved but deliberate, and bowed slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture that carried the weight of a challenge. "Lady Eloan," he said, his voice low yet clear enough to slice through the murmurs, "the world may observe, but I wish you to understand. Neither its judgment nor its expectation will dictate my regard. His gaze held hers, magnetic, unyielding, and the ballroom seemed to shrink until they existed alone, poised on the precipice of propriety and desire. Eloan's breath caught. She had rehearsed restraint in the mirrors of her room, each reflection a reminder of duty, each gesture a rehearsal in politeness. And yet here, beneath the scrutinizing eyes of every noble in attendance, she felt herself unraveling, her carefully constructed composure both challenged and illuminated by the intensity of his attention. "My lord," she murmured, voice a whisper of silk and apprehension, "You must understand the obligations I bear. They are not so easily set aside." He stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing, each footfall a declaration. "Obligations," he said, the word weighted with irony, "are chains of our own acceptance. And yet chains may be shattered, if one possesses the courage to confront them. I do not ask you to defy honor for whim, Lady Eloan. I ask only that you acknowledge the truth we have glimpsed together, an undeniable reality no whisper, no promise can erase." His eyes, dark as tempestuous skies, softened with an intensity that made her pulse throb painfully in her chest. A ripple of scandal had begun to spread, subtle yet unmistakable. Eyes darted toward them, some curious, some disapproving, and the faintest murmurs passed through the assembled guests. Eloan felt the weight of every glance, each one a question, a judgment, a silent accusation. Her cheeks warmed, and yet she did not retreat. The Duke's presence anchored her, a fierce gravity that demanded both recognition and courage. She raised her chin, fingers brushing the silk of her skirts, and found her voice. "And if the world disapproves?" she whispered, not to him but to herself, a question more rhetorical than seeking answer. "It may disapprove," he admitted, a faint shadow of a smile tugging at his lips, "yet its whispers are powerless against what is already resolved in the heart. I claim no more than truth, Lady Eloan. And truth, once acknowledged, cannot be denied, no matter the vigilance of society." He paused, the words hanging like a suspended cord in the music, charged with both promise and peril. The orchestra swelled again, the dancers turning in spirals of silk and satin, oblivious to the tension that now thickened the air. The Duke's hand extended, gloved and unwavering, a gesture at once daring and courteous. "Will you dance with me?" His voice was deliberate, resonant, a summons that carried the weight of inevitability. The invitation was more than a request. It was a challenge to every expectation, every whispered obligation, a defiance wrapped in civility. Eloan hesitated, the full weight of her betrothal pressing against the thrill of possibility. Her pulse raced, hands trembling at her sides, yet her gaze never wavered from his. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his, the contact light but electric, sending a shiver through the careful lattice of propriety she had woven around herself. The crowd watched, some with admiration, some with veiled disapproval, yet in that moment, the ballroom became a stage not for society's judgment, but for the quiet rebellion of two hearts daring to defy expectation. They moved into the waltz, their steps harmonizing not merely with the music, but with the unspoken rhythm of recognition, desire, and shared courage. Every turn, every subtle brush of fingertips, carried a tension that set the room abuzz, though no word was spoken aloud. She could feel the steadiness of his gaze, the deliberate restraint in his touch, the unspoken promise that he would not overstep what she could not yet surrender. And in that careful navigation of proximity and restraint, she discovered the intoxicating thrill of acknowledgement, the knowledge that someone of such power and consequence could see her, truly see her, beneath the delicate scaffolding of duty and expectation. Whispers rippled through the assembly, quicksilver threads of rumor and curiosity. "The Duke, with the Earl's daughter," some murmured. "Such boldness," said others. And yet Eloan felt no shame, only the faintest tremor of exhilaration. The scandal was real, but so was the undeniable reality of connection, the magnetic pull between two beings who understood the peril, yet could not resist the gravity of attraction. The music slowed, the waltz drawing toward its final lingering note, and the Duke's hand remained in hers, a tether to possibility, to audacity, to a truth that existed beyond propriety. "Tonight," he whispered, voice low, resonant, "we acknowledge what has been quietly building between us. And know this, whatever the world demands, whatever chains they present, this," he gestured subtly between them, "is ours alone if only we dare to claim it." Eloan's heart swelled, a mixture of fear and triumph, longing and courage. She met his gaze fully, and in that instant recognized the perilous beauty of their connection. Scandal was inevitable, desire undeniable, and yet in the acknowledgement of one another, they found a strength neither had anticipated. The world may have judged, the betrothal may have bound her, yet for this fleeting luminous moment she was not merely a daughter, a ward of expectation, but a woman choosing to see, to feel, to dare. And as the orchestra's final note faded into a hush, a sudden hush unlike any before, a voice called from across the ballroom, a sharp interruption, a reminder of the ever-present chains of duty, promise, and scrutiny. Eloan's breath caught, her hand still in his, and the Duke's eyes darkened with the gravity of the intrusion. A promise unspoken but understood. The world had noticed, and the storm was only beginning. The dawn broke over Thornwood Hall in a hesitant wash of pale gold, the kind that gilds rooftops and stains window panes with fleeting promise. Lady Eloan stood by the drawing-room window, the locket pressed against her heart, her gaze tracing the mist that clung to the gardens like a hesitant veil. The events of the previous evening still clung to her like the lingering scent of rain. The waltz with the Duke, the whispers of society, the daring acknowledgement of desire that had both thrilled and terrified her. The world had noticed, and the chains of expectation pressed heavier than ever, yet within her chest a new-found courage flickered, fragile yet unyielding. The Duke arrived shortly after, his presence announced by the echo of boots upon polished stone, the scent of damp wool and leather filling the room before he appeared fully in the light. His eyes, dark and storm-kissed, found hers immediately, and she felt the familiar pull, magnetic and unrelenting. "Lady Eloan," he murmured, voice low but insistent, "the day demands no ceremony, yet I cannot abide the pretense of distance any longer." He moved closer, each step measured, deliberate, and yet imbued with the unspoken urgency of a man who had long restrained both passion and declaration. She met him halfway, the air between them taut with anticipation. "The world watches," she said softly, a tremor threading her words. "And we are bound by more than desire. Promises were made, and society will not overlook our defiance." He inclined his head, expression grave yet tender. "Then we shall act not as rebels against society, but as arbiters of our own truth. Duty may be a chain, Lady Eloan, but love is the key should we possess the courage to use it." His hand hovered near hers, and she felt the heat radiating from his presence, the gravity of inevitability pressing upon every careful thought she had ever entertained. The morning air was crisp as they walked into the gardens, dew glistening on every petal and leaf like the remnants of starlight caught upon fragile surfaces. Servants hurried past with quiet efficiency, yet none dared intrude upon the space the Duke and Eloan now inhabited, a space suspended between propriety and passion. "I cannot abide shadows any longer," he said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "You are promised, yes, but the promise of another cannot claim the substance of your heart. I will not ask you to abandon honor, but I will demand the truth of your own desire. Tell me, do you wish to be mine?" Eloan's breath caught between fear and the thrill of affirmation. She pressed the locket into her palm, the pressed violet a tactile reminder of both the past gestures of daring and the burgeoning hope of a life reclaimed. I do," she whispered, the words trembling yet resolute. "I do, if you can promise that the world will not strip me of my dignity in the process." The Duke's smile was the faintest curve, a shadow of triumph softened by tenderness. "Dignity is yours to preserve, Lady Eloan. I seek only to honor what is already present. The courage, the intelligence, the fire I have long admired. The world may murmur, but it cannot touch that which exists between us, unseen and unbroken." Their hands met at last, fingers intertwining with a deliberate gravity, each touch a declaration, a promise and a rebellion wrapped in civility. Around them, the gardens shimmered in the early light, each droplet of dew a prism reflecting the intensity of a union that had not yet been sanctioned by law or society but was undeniable in every pulse, every glance, every measured breath. The quiet was broken by the sudden approach of her betrothed, his figure framed by the rising sun, eyes widening at the sight of their hands entwined. "Lady Eloan," he said, voice careful, measured, yet tinged with unmistakable surprise. His words faltered, the certainty of expectation dissolving as he observed the resolve and quiet triumph etched across her face. She released his hand with the grace of measured courtesy, turning to face him fully. "I am grateful for your regard," she said, voice steady, "but my path is chosen, not by the obligations of convenience, but by the truths my heart cannot deny." The words were poised, delicate, yet sharp enough to cut through any claim of duty, leaving the observer momentarily stunned. The Duke stepped closer, a subtle shield of authority and presence, ensuring no further interruption could unsettle the fragile resolution. "We shall not seek confrontation," he said softly, for the heart does not require the sanction of others to know its own will. Lady Eloin, the world may watch, but what is ours cannot be unmade by whispers or expectation. Even as the betrothed retreated, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acknowledgement in his eyes, the weight of societal judgment pressed upon them. Eloin's pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from the exquisite terror of choice fully realized. She realized in a sudden and heady rush, that to live fully in this world demanded courage, audacity, and the willingness to face consequence with dignity. The Duke, sensing the shift within her, took her hands in both of his, thumbs brushing along delicate knuckles with a gravity that was both commanding and protective. "Let us then claim this moment," he said, voice low, resonant with authority and longing. "We may not yet possess the approval of the world, but we possess one another. And that is enough to begin." A gust of wind swept through the gardens, lifting her hair and gown in a delicate, chaotic motion that mirrored the tumult of emotion within her. She laughed softly, a sound of release, a sound of triumph tempered by caution. "Enough," she whispered, eyes alight with a mixture of wonder and certainty. "For now enough." The morning stretched onward, sunlight filtering through the clouds in gentle shafts that lit the dew-streaked petals like living jewels. The Duke lowered his forehead to hers, a deliberate intimacy that carried neither haste nor impropriety, only acknowledgement and claim. "You are mine," he whispered, "not by law, nor by whim, nor by convenience, but by every truth I have seen and cherished. And if the world opposes, it shall find no victory, for our hearts are steadfast." Eloin's response was a measured sigh, a concession to relief and exhilaration entwined. "And I am yours," she said, voice steady, heart racing with the weight of declaration. "Though the path remains perilous and the eyes of society ever watchful, I will not falter. We have begun, and that beginning is ours alone." The gravity of finality hung between them, not in fear but in triumph. They stood amidst the glistening gardens, fingers entwined, hearts synchronized in a rhythm of choice and acknowledgement. Outside, the sun fully claimed the sky, the storm of the night past replaced by a calm brilliance that seemed to reflect the clarity of their decision. Yet the world beyond the gates of Thornawood Hall was not idle. The distant toll of a carriage bell, the faint murmur of approaching visitors, the ripple of scandalous rumor already taking form, these reminded them that the path they had chosen would be neither smooth nor unobserved. And yet, standing together, hands clasped, breaths mingling, the magnitude of societal expectation shrank before the certainty of their claim. The Duke lifted her hand to his lips, brushing it with reverent gravity, eyes locking on hers with unyielding devotion. "Whatever trials await," he said, "know this, we have faced the greatest trial already, the trial of knowing and acknowledging the truth of our hearts. Everything else is mere circumstance." Eloin's gaze, steady and radiant, met his with unwavering conviction. "Then let circumstance come," she replied softly, the faintest smile curling her lips. "We shall meet it together, unbroken, unyielding, and unafraid." A distant cry of a servant startled them both, a reminder of the world beyond their sanctuary, yet neither flinched. The promise had been made, the bond declared, and the storm of desire and courage that had begun in whispered glances and stolen tokens had culminated in this moment of undeniable, unassailable truth. They were together, fully, deliberately, and the tension that had bound them in suspense now dissolved into a quiet, potent victory. And as they stood amidst the dew-laden gardens, hands entwined, the rising sun illuminating the first tremulous triumphs of their love, both knew the path ahead would demand courage, resilience, and audacity, but they had begun, and beginnings, however perilous, were where true life always took hold. The first step was theirs, and in that step lay the promise of every moment to come, a defiance of expectation, a triumph of desire, and a union neither society nor circumstance could undo.